base. Yuck. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Thursday, October 24th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, we are recapping the top performers at second base from this past season. Spoiler alert, not great. And taking an early look at 2025 rankings. Let's start with a quick look at ADP entering this season. The top 10 second basemen being drafted: Mookie Betts, Ozzie Albies, Marcus Semien, Jose Altuve, Nico Hoerner, Matt McLain, Gleyber Torres, Ha-Seong Kim, Xander Bogaerts, Ketel Marte. Only 5 of 10 were correct.
Yeah, well, there's your problem right there.
Yeah,
that's a pretty crummy list of players.
Worse accuracy than catcher and first base. Both catcher and first base, one more, so 6 out of 10. Not a huge deal, but there were lots of injuries at this position this year with Mookie Betts, Ozzie Albies, Matt McLain, Ha-Seong Kim, Xander Bogaerts, and also lots of players losing second base eligibility heading into next year. So Mookie Betts, right up at the top, will not have second base eligibility, followed by Spencer Steer, Luis Arraez, Ha-Seong Kim, Tommy Edman, Xavier Edwards, Tyler Fitzgerald, Ryan McMahon, Cedar Rafaela, and Matt McLain.
Connor Norby, too.
Some of those players could regain second base eligibility. Like, I think we all expect Matt McLain to play second base, and maybe the Marlins just figure out, wow, Xavier Edwards is really bad at shortstop. We have to play him at second base. So, some of those guys can gain it. But as of now, not so great. And Scott, that's where I will go to you. One word to describe the state of second base.
Ew. Breaking out a little Ernest P. Worrell here at the start of the show. And like, the thing is, we gave a negative kind of guttural moan for both catcher and first base as well. And second base is like rock bottom. This is the worst of the worst here among what looks to
catcher's worse.
Well, catcher's kind of its own category.
Yeah.
But the infield is in bad shape right now, apart from shortstop. So if you're listening, just the way we progress through the positions generally, it makes it sound like they're all bad. It's just the order we're going in. We're getting the bad ones out of the way first. But yeah, second base is really bad, and you summed up a lot of the reason why. Especially Xavier Edwards and Tyler Fitzgerald losing eligibility there. That's the real gut punch, because those guys came in mid-season, and it's like, well, we're not totally sure they're this good. They're kind of flawed players that just happen to excel in this strange way. But we'll give them the benefit of the doubt because they play second base. But now they don't play second base anymore. They're at shortstop, which is loaded.
And one thing I want to point out is that I think second base is kind of a microcosm for the juiced ball era, because what you saw was from 2005 to 2014 to 2004 to 2013. Sorry, let me make sure I get the numbers right. Only 7.9% of 20 homer seasons in the majors were by second baseman. That was from 2004 to 2013. From 2014 to 2023, 13.6 of 20 homer seasons in the majors were by second baseman. That's almost double. Last year, 6.7% of the 20 homer seasons in the majors were by second baseman. So just a big drop off. And, we've started to see some of the, and you saw something similar with the steroid era, where it wasn't obviously all second basemen or middle infielders or historically light hitting positions were starting to have for power, but the gains were bigger there, right? There were already 30 homer guys playing the outfield and first base and third base. Those basically never existed at second base in Major League history until, I don't know, Brett Boone and Jeff Kent and guys like that came around in the late 90s and early 2000s. And
Dan
really,
Uggla, baby. Dan Uggla.
Dan Uggla, yeah. There's, insert your favorite 2000s slugging second baseman here. And that is not entirely gone, but it's kind of gone. There were only 7 last year. Only 5 of those will actually be second base eligible for fantasy next year because Spencer Steer and Ryan McMahon got to the 20 homer mark last year and will not be eligible. So,
yeah. Well, and what's exacerbated that issue is the shift ban, because when infield shifting was at its highest, teams were willing to stick a positionless player that they would have normally had to confine to first base. They were willing to stick him at second base because
the example I always think of is Mike Moustakas with I think it was when he was with the Brewers and they started playing him at second base. And I think at first it was just like an emergency, like someone got hurt and they were like, oh, it doesn't matter that he can't move. We can just do that.
You can shift around it. You can shift around a second baseman with no range, but now it's harder to do that. And so we're seeing less of that, which is helping to reduce the power at the position. I don't think the juice ball era kind of killed position scarcity.
Yeah.
For the reasons you mentioned. And it's come back a little since then, but I don't know that we'll ever see it come all the way back. I mean, for most of baseball history, your hitters basically came from 3 positions: first base, left field, and right field. Maybe you'd get something from your third baseman, maybe from your center fielder, but up the middle and catcher were just mainly defense. And I don't think, I think we're so far from that like position scarcity isn't a huge deal, but to the degree it's going to matter in 2025, I think it's going to matter most at second base.
Shout out to you, Scott, with that Ernest reference, because that reminded me, my favorite of all his movies, Ernest Scared Stupid, is relevant now. It's spooky season, obviously. I don't know. I assume that it aged very, very poorly.
I mean, is he in jail in that one? Is that, or is that Ernest Goes to Jail?
That's Ernest Goes to Jail.
Okay.
When I mentioned Ernest, I thought both of you were looking at me cockeyed.
So I do have to confirm that, like, when you said Ernest P. Howell,
Worrell.
Sure.
Okay.
I had to go look who that was.
Okay.
This is one instance where saying the full name actually makes me less certain. It would be like if I said, oh, my favorite singer, Madonna Sissoni.
But
like nobody knows who that is. It's just Madonna.
He referred
I've
to
never
himself
seen
in
one of
third
those
person
movies
all the time.
I've never seen one of those movies. Maybe I've seen Ernest Goes to Camp.
So my first reaction was, okay, I'm relieved Frank's actually heard of him. But my second reaction is, oh, wait, it's not at all surprising that Frank was into the Ernest movies.
I don't know that I was into all of them.
Has never seen Goodfellas, but Ernest Scared Straight.
There's some really bad ones.
I've seen Goodfellas. I like Goodfellas a lot, actually. But for all the dads out there, if you need a kiddie Halloween movie, Ernest Scared Stupid, I think we'll get the job done.
I think Saves Christmas is my favorite.
All right. Well, there's your Ernest segment of the day. Let's get into the top 10 second basemen from this past season based on roto/categories. I will mention if they were actually, no, I didn't do that. I don't know. For some reason, I had that in the notes. I was supposed to. I didn't look up their head-to-head points rank. So we'll just be talking about where they ranked in roto and head-to-head categories. But you know the difference for a lot of these players. If we talk about plate discipline, obviously they will most likely be better in the head-to-head points format. Number 1 this past season was Ketel Marte, who had a huge breakout season. 292 with 36 home runs, 7 steals, a 932 OPS. Made some improvements to his quality of contact, career high 94.1 average exit velocity. That ranked in the 98th percentile. He also pulled the ball more than ever before, and it clearly worked. Chris, I love the skill set in terms of just combining plate discipline with the ability to hit the ball as hard as he does. But I think the prudent move is to at least expect a little bit of regression in 2025 for Ketel Marte.
Yeah, it's a career year for a 30-year-old, a guy who's going to be 31 in 2025. So, yeah, I think expecting a step back is probably the right decision. I still think he's probably the number 1 player at the position. I'm assuming that's the way I ranked it. That is. I haven't looked at it in about 3 weeks. So it'll be a nice surprise at the end of the episode. And yeah, like, look, Ketel Marte has been a really good hitter for a pretty long time now. About 5 years was when he broke out, 6 years ago, 2019. And I think a lot of people wrote it off as a juice ball thing. Like, oh, he's not really a power hitter. And then before 2024, he hadn't come close to hitting 32 homers again. Well, now he did it. Now that's 2 seasons. They're 6 years apart where he's hit at this level.
Well,
it's certainly within the realm of it's within his range of outcomes. Like a truly elite season is within the range of possibility for Ketel Marte. Should you draft him expecting this? No. If you drafted him expecting 2025 or 2024 again, he'd be an easy second round pick and might be even higher.
What I want to say is, yes, this was only his second time hitting 30 home runs, and the previous time was 6 years prior. But just 1 year prior, 2023, he hit 25 home runs. And 3 of the last 6 years, he's had a 900 OPS or better, which is a huge OPS.
Yeah.
And in fact, you were saying 2024 was a career year. I think 2019 was actually the career year by OPS, 981, then 932 this year. And even so he's had kind of this on again, off again pattern. The 3 900 OPSs came with okay, so after the first one, 7. So he's gone 981, 732, 909, 727, 844, 932. I guess maybe he's ended the on again, off again pattern with the last 2 years. But my point was, even during those not so productive years for Ketel Marte, the underlying data still looked great. Like, it's still like this guy's had bad luck or something weird is going on with the way the ball leaves his bat or whatever. But the talent, the raw talent, was evident throughout that for Ketel Marte. And so I think it's fair to expect less than 36 home runs, less than a 932 OPS next year. But from the weakest non-catcher position, I'll invest a second round pick and late second round pick and wherever those numbers end up. If it's 30 home runs, if it's 28 home runs and an 850 OPS at second base, that's still worth a late second round pick to me. When we did our 2-round drafting the first 2 rounds a week or 2 ago, Ketel Marte didn't make the cut, but I think he should have. Like, I'd take Ketel Marte over Rafael Devers, even though Devers is more bankable from year to year. Ketel Marte just feels like such a distant number 1 at second base now. 3.68 points per game from him this past year. Only one other player was even over 3. Jose Altuve, 3.05 versus Ketel Marte's 3.68.
It was a little closer in Roto. I think part of that is Marte played fewer games. He had an IL stint this year, right?
I believe so. And I think you should probably expect at least one of those per season.
That's been the biggest knock on him. It has actually been better the last 3 seasons. He's played 137, 150, and 136 games. And actually, like, if you look at the last 6 seasons, there are 2 years where he played only double-digit games. One of those was 2020. So we can, like, he missed 15 games in 2020. That's unfortunate, but like that, I'm not saying, oh, he missed a quarter of the season there, right? Like that, we don't know how that would have worked out. So it's basically just 2021 where he missed a lot of time. And actually, that's the 3rd 900 OPS season. So he was really good. He's had, like, I think it's been a lot of like recurring hamstring injuries for Ketel Marte, which is, frustrating and a little concerning, but I think there's injury risk. But what helps him in that regard is, I guess I don't know who Scott has ranked 2, 3, 4 at the position, but there's a lot of concern about injuries and age with the other 2 of the other 3, and the other one has missed a lot of time with what are probably just fluky injuries, but still. So I think Ketel Marte is the clear number 1, even if, you look at the last 6 seasons overall, it's an 869 OPS. He's averaged 28 homers, 90 runs, 90 RBI, 98 runs, 90 RBI, 8 steals per 162 games in that span. That feels like a pretty solid projection for Ketel Marte.
The number 2 second baseman this year was Jose Altuve, who stayed healthy and had himself a solid season, hit 295 with 20 home runs, 22 steals, and 94 runs scored. He was one of 19 players to go 2020, but is age starting to creep in? He turns 35 in May of next year. 790 OPS was his lowest since 2020. And there were some troublesome underlying plate discipline metrics for Jose Altuve. So, Scott, I don't really want to bet against him Neither do you. You're wearing the Space City shirt in honor of him.
With his name and number on the back, yeah.
I don't want to bet against him, but I'm a little nervous moving forward. A little bit.
Yeah, I am too. This was the healthiest Altuve's been in a long time. The most games he's played since 2017. And it always felt like, okay, per game production, if he could just stay healthy, he's still, a second round caliber player at a weak position. And he managed to stay healthy, and it was a little underwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
He went 2020. It was the first time he had gone 2020 again since 2017, though health was a part of that. He hit 295, so he remains a standout for batting average. Strangely, it's like the runs were low for a leadoff hitter. The RBI weren't great either. That seems to be mainly what's held him back. And I still think of the Astros as having a good lineup, one that could bounce back and score a ton of runs next year. So I'm worried I might be dinging Altuve a little too much. My gut reaction is I don't want him as much as I used to, but I don't know that that's sensible.
The thing that I think will make me want Jose Altuve this year is what you're saying. I think a lot of people are going to not want him and are going to be like, I don't think Jose Altuve is going to be my most drafted second baseman because there's another older guy that I'm probably going to draft a bunch this year. But, Altuve, the contact skills are so strong still. The park obviously helps him a ton. I don't know if Jose Altuve would be a 15 homer guy in any other park in baseball, but where he plays, the skill set that he has, I don't know. It was a weird season. Like the walk rate collapsed, which is a weird thing. It was the lowest it's been since 2015, I think. And I don't know what to make of that. Is that maybe, hey, Jose Altuve is 34 years old and he's got to cheat and his play discipline's not going to be as good because he has to cheat. The bat slowed down a little bit. Or is it just a weird thing that happened one time? I genuinely don't know. He did swing more.
He chased a lot, and his swinging strike rate was a career high. So
he chased and swung on pitches in the zone more. His chase rate was up to 37%. That was a career high. Zone swing rate was actually 68.6%, the highest it's been in any year since 2016. So he was just up there hacking more than we've seen in a long time. And maybe that's just what he has to do, right? Maybe he just can't be as selective anymore because he's a fraction slower, but the bat to ball skills are still strong enough that when he makes contact, he'll be good and he's going to make a lot of contact. But yeah, it's with a player at this point in their career, the bottom can fall out anytime. You expect Hall of Famers to keep their head afloat better than most players, but he's already past the point where most players are expected to start to fall off.
I generally look at performance against four-seam fastballs to see if a player's swing is slowing down, and it showed up in a big way with Paul Goldschmidt last year. And I looked at it. I know when I was ranking for Altuve, I looked it up for Altuve, and the numbers are good against four-seamers, so I kind of moved on. It was his worst ever K rate against four-seamers at 15.6. His career mark is 9. And it was his worst ever swinging strike rate against four-seamers.
Worst ever ex-WOBA, worst WOBA as well.
6.1% swinging strike rate versus 4. Now, a 15 point whatever strikeout rate and a 6% swinging strike rate, those are still good numbers in a vacuum, but they do suggest some slight regression there for Jose Altuve specifically.
All right, before we hit our first break, reminder that you can always listen to FBT and our 5-minute podcast, Fantasy Baseball Today in 5, on Spotify. If you're watching on YouTube, scan the QR code on the screen now, and that will take you right to the FBT Spotify feed. Let's take our first break, and when we return, on to the number 3 second baseman, Brice Turang. We'll do that right after this.
Saturdays at 3:30.
It's big time.
CBS Sports has a big-time game with big-time implications when the top-ranked Oregon Ducks welcome in number 20 Illinois. It's big time. Saturday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
Welcome back in. And just to recap, the top 2 second basemen this past season, Ketel Marte and Jose Altuve. Number 3 was Brice Turang, who kind of had a breakout in one category, I guess. Hit 254 with 7 home runs and 50 stolen bases, the 3rd most in baseball. And it was basically a tale of 2 seasons. The first 3 months for Turang, he hit 292 with 6 home runs, 28 steals, and a 771 OPS. Last 3 months, he hit 214 with 1 homer, 22 steals, and a 551 OPS. Outside of those steals, he was unusable across the board. Chris, is there another step forward? Maybe. He's only 25 years old, but I'm not sure that I see it under the hood.
Yeah, I wrote about busts for the Fantasy Baseball Today newsletter. I think we're going to talk about that for FBT and 5 later in the week. Spoiler alert, Brice Turang is on there. It feels like he had a good 3 months, and that's basically it. I don't know, like there's pretty good contact skills there. He might be a decent source of batting average, right? Like he might be able to hit 265, 270, get on base a little bit. His walk rate is okay, but there's no punch here. And I worry that, like, you saw hit pitchers get more aggressive with fastballs against him last season. I just don't know if like he's got an adjustment to it. So yeah, I think cheap steals, but this feels like the kind of profile that could, frankly, be in the minors by midseason. Like, you know, the Brewers have a ton of interchangeable parts. It's been kind of frustrating, including for Brice Turang as a rookie, to find playing time for everybody. And, you know, if he's more like a low 600s OPS bat, I don't know if he's guaranteed a spot in the lineup. His defense is pretty good, so maybe.
Yeah, I mean, he's like a Gold Glove caliber defender.
Yeah.
Isn't he a Gold Glove finalist? I know his WAR is surprisingly high because of how good his defense is.
He rates really high according to StatCast and outs above average. So.
Yeah. So I think that probably buys Brice Turang a lot of grace as far as playing time goes. I think the most likely scenario is his full season stat line is about who he is, which was a 254 batting average. If you don't look at the all-star performance in the first half and the terrible performance in the second half, you just take 250, 260 batting average with 40 to 50 steals, hopefully. I think that's the most likely outcome for Brice Turang next year. But I do think a total collapse is more likely than him taking another step forward and actually performing like a top 5 second baseman again. I rank him 9th for next year in Roto.
Mm-hmm. The number 4 second baseman was Luis Garcia Jr., who had a breakout season himself, hit 282 with 18 home runs and 22 steals. He raised the launch angle, he lowered the ground ball rate, and obviously it paid off for him. And I think he is a very intriguing player who turns 25 years old next May. So just kind of entering his prime now, but Scott, there are questions here. Can he hit lefties? Will he play against lefties? Can he be adequate against lefties? I think those are obviously the main questions. And will he steal as much? You know, the Nationals were very aggressive this year. He had the 22 steals. He's only 45th percentile sprint speed. So I do worry about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's fair to ask those questions for Luis Garcia. But the other thing to remember is he spent most of this year at 23 years old, right? He's now 24. So very, very young, younger than I think most people realize because he started his career at an insanely young age. And so I am pretty encouraged about the year he just had. I wasn't sure he'd ever reach this level. You look back at the scouting reports for Luis Garcia when he was a teenager, and they were pretty optimistic. But the proof is in the pudding, and he finally delivered something worthwhile at the major league level. Will he play against left-handers is the biggest question for me for 2025. He should. I know he's not very good against left-handers, but you want to give him a chance to become good, at least startable against left-handers, as young as he is and as much upside as he offers. And
so this is my concern.
mm-hmm.
I agree they should.
Mm-hmm.
They're the Nationals.
I am worried that he's going to be drafted as if they will let him play more against second lefties, and that is where, again,
Well, he just finished fourth, not playing against lefties. He's not going to be drafted that high.
We're not counting players who are no longer second base eligible, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because Mookie Betts and Spencer Steer were ahead of him. Like, I don't know, sixth at second base is. He did finish sixth at second base. That's technically correct. But like it was 58 runs, 70 RBI, batting average is 282, but that's not playing against lefties. I think the
batting average was 90th percentile. So
no. I understand.
282.
I was going to get there.
Right. If his performance against left-handers makes him more like a 265 hitter, but with more bats, scoring, because he scored 58 runs this year. I mean, horrible number. But he's able to deliver better run and RBI totals, presumably a better home run total as well. Then I think it's worth it. I think that's a worthy trade-off. He is, not to reveal too much ahead of time, Luis Garcia is number 6 for me at second base. There are 5 good second basemen. So Luis Garcia is my highest ranked of the ones that I'm not sure are actually good, but at least there's a lot of promise there. I mean, he almost went 20-20 with a good batting average.
For me, it mostly comes down to price with Luis Garcia. If he's a top 100 pick, I'm probably out.
Okay.
I just think there will be way better players you can draft with a top 100 pick, even acknowledging positional scarcity and room for a young player to grow. That's what it's going to come down to me.
Mm-hmm. And I could be way off on this, but I am almost sure that he will be a top 100 pick in fantasy in 2025. That was Luis Garcia. On to the number 5 second baseman, Nico Hoerner, who actually, when it was all said and done, had a pretty similar season to his 2023. He just regressed a little bit across the board, and he actually got off to a really slow start and then hit 297 with 17 steals in the second half. He's a solid player, but another one with questions. This just came out last week that Nico Hoerner underwent surgery 2 weeks ago to repair his right flexor tendon. And once the Cubs arrive at spring training, Hoerner will be assessed by their medical team, and that's when they'll determine the next steps. So, Chris, obviously, I think there's a productive player here, but kind of lots up in the air right now.
Yeah, Scott, I noticed we both have him ranked 7th right now. I'm going to put a big italics, underline, asterisk. I don't know if I'm going to move him down by the time we discuss it, but that's a big concern for a guy whose skill set does not allow for much margin for error. Like if he comes out and just loses 3 percentage points in strikeout rate, all of a sudden is he a, 260 true talent hitter with single-digit home runs and the weird not stealing in the first half last year, which we don't know if that's going to continue. What part of, because he had 14 steals before the All-Star break, 17 after, and obviously the All-Star break, pre-All-Star break is much larger sample size. So, like, if he's a 260 hitter with 7 home runs and 25 steals, that's not nothing, but it's not a player you're particularly excited about. So we'll put a pin in Nico Hoerner for now, I think.
I'm not that concerned about a flexor tendon surgery in early October for a position player. Like that seems like enough time to be ready. I suppose it'll be obvious by spring training if he's not, but that seems like enough time. So I don't think it'll be a factor. I don't plan to move him down from 7th based on this news. I see Nico Hoerner as much more trustworthy than Brice Turang.
Yeah.
And they're only 1 spot apart in my rankings at second base. They might be 40 spots apart in my overall rankings because Hoerner's now proven that he's a rare example of a hitter who has no power but can still be useful in fantasy. consistently because of the steals. Because in points leagues, he gives you a lot of doubles, which helps. He's actually even better in points leagues. He's fine. He's not exciting, but he's actually startable at this position, which says a lot.
So there are not a lot of examples that I can find of position players having flexor tendon surgery. One that I can find is Mitch Garver in 2022. He had it on July 11th and missed the rest of the season. That doesn't really tell us anything about Nico Hoerner, but the story I'm reading says the surgery requires a 6 to 8 month recovery time. The Cubs haven't said the same about Nico Hoerner, and maybe it's a different type of surgery.
Garver was a catcher, which takes a lot of arm strength.
But that is that's something to keep an eye on, because if it's 6 months, well, that's actually not opening day. That gets him a couple weeks after opening day. If it's 8 months, you're talking about June.
Yeah.
Right? Is my math there right? Yeah, that sounds right. So right. That again, I'm not saying I'm going to move him down. I don't like anybody else at the position, so who am I going to move him down for? Like, I just looked at it and I was like, do I really want to move Xander Bogaerts or Brandon Lau or what? Like Luis Rengifo maybe, but he's got his own injury.
I just don't think there's a lot of reason for him ringing over right now, because like almost nobody drafts before spring training, right? If spring training starts and they're giving us a murky timeline for Nico Hoerner, okay, move him down. If he's in the lineup, or they say he's going to be in the lineup March 15th, probably don't move him down.
Yeah. Number 6 second baseman was Marcus Semien, another where you just wonder if father time is starting to catch up here. A down year for Semien, who hit .237 with 23 homers, 101 runs, and 8 steals. And the steals continue to trend down from 25 to 14 to 8 over the past 3 seasons. Scott, do you think Marcus Semien has a bounce back in him?
I think there's a good chance. He's old, and so we've kind of been waiting for him to drop off. But apart from the surface level numbers, I don't see a lot of evidence of decline. He struck out just as infrequently. He hit the ball just as hard, which is to say not very, but it always worked for him before. He's been, in fact, if you look at his StatCast readings, they're virtually identical to 2022, when nobody was talking about a Marcus Semien decline. It's just that he ran a lot more in 2022. And I think that's the kind of X factor for Semien. Does he get back to running? I'm not saying he has to be a top 5 second baseman in fantasy, as weak as second base is, but that puts more pressure on his bat, obviously, if he doesn't get back to running.
What you don't see is a decline in sprint speed. I mean, a little bit, but he's still 81st percentile. He was 84th the year before. You don't really see any kind of decline in contact skills. You don't really see any decline in defense. So I'm with Scott. Like, this was since Marcus Semien's 2019 breakthrough, he had outperformed his expected WOBA by at least 12 points every year, at least 10 points every year. And some years it was 21, like in 2023. Last year, he underperformed his expected WOBA. Sorry, he had overperformed. Did I say underperformed every year? He had overperformed every year from 2019 through 2023 by at least 10 points. Last year, he underperformed by 13. This was actually only his 3rd worst expected WOBA since 2019. So in terms of the skills that we typically rely on, there doesn't appear to be any collapse for Marcus Semien. It was just that the results weren't there. So I mentioned earlier, there's an old second baseman I'm probably going to draft the most of. I think Marcus Semien is a really obvious bounce back candidate. And I considered ranking him as high as 3rd.
And it was just kind of a weird season for the Rangers all around, kind of a World Series hangover this year. So hopefully if Corey Seager is fully healthy for, close to a full season next year, and just they could get, bounce back seasons from some of those guys, then I think overall the Rangers lineup should be much better in 2025. Number 7 second baseman was Maikel Garcia, who also kind of had a breakout, I guess, The batting average was bad, 231, but he scored 84 runs. He had 37 steals, only hit 7 homers, underperformed his expected stats by quite a bit. Actually hits the ball kind of hard for, I guess, a quote-unquote speedster, but it just seems like a really streaky player. He had 2 months with an OPS below 460. I don't know that he's assured a job. Like, if he just starts that bad again, like if he's hitting 200 by June, does he still have a job? But, if the expected numbers are any indication and, he just kind of bounces back, he hits 260 with like 30 steals, and that's a useful player. So, Scott, how do you project someone like Maikel Garcia?
Yeah, that's a good question. I project him pessimistically because I rank him 19th at second base, even though he finished 7th. Yeah, I mean, look, he's for a team with playoff aspirations, which we have to assume the Royals have. They just made the playoffs. He's not a starting caliber player. He doesn't they need to upgrade, and I suspect they will. If they don't, I suppose I'll have to adjust up just for the stolen base potential. But he was bad, and he started to lose playing time in the second half because of it.
To Paul DeYoung, it's not like they went out and got a huge upgrade. It was a White Sox cast off. And then I think you just look at the stolen base potential and like, he stole 37 bases this year. That's awesome. He was only caught stealing twice. He's not going to do that again. Like, he's 66 percentile in sprint speed. There's no way he's running a 95% caught stealing rate again. So like, you probably, if he runs the same amount next year, I think you're lucky if he gets 30, and he probably won't run as much next year. So yeah, I'm there. It's also one where like the average exit velocity is 70th percentile. That's actually really strong. And then you look at the barrel rate, it's 10th percentile.
Lots of balls.
Yeah, like that seems to me the case where he's just kind of a Cabrian Hayes, where he just does not hit the ball hard in ways that actually help.
Well, the biggest red flag is the 281 on base percentage, which maybe in roto leagues we don't look at that so much, but like to justify a lineup spot with a sub 300 OBP, you better be a standout defender at a premium position, and Maikel Garcia isn't.
I do think, I could be wrong, but I think when I was looking up his StatCast stuff, that he is a pretty good defender, at least according to those metrics. Yeah,
he's not playing shortstop though, is the thing. Like at a premium position.
Right. No, I hear that. Look, something you're gonna, I guess we'll see with this position, second base, is there are a lot of these like middle infield archetype players where you'd expect like a 250 to 260 batting average, 10 homers, and 30 steals. And if Maikel Garcia has the job and keeps the job, that's something I could see him doing. And it's very similar to the next two players we're going to talk about, Bryson Stott and Andres Gimenez. I just think they're all kind of in that similar archetype.
I think a best case scenario for Garcia could be similar, but you're hoping he does what they are pretty reliably going to do.
Yeah, the number 8 second baseman was Bryson Stott, who I just mentioned. Through 3 seasons, it looks like 2023 was a clear outlier, at least as of now. It's still pretty early in his career, but he's had a 245 batting average or less in 2 of 3 seasons. Bryson Stott has had a 671 OPS or less in 2 of 3 seasons, but he has provided 30-plus steals 2 years in a row. And again, Scott, this just kind of feels like that archetype, 250, 10 homers, 30 steals. It's a helpful player in like a 12-team roto league, but I don't know that he's a standout if he's your starting second baseman.
Yeah, the biggest problems for Bryson Stott are he tends to sit against left-handed pitchers as a left-handed hitter. He doesn't always do it, but he sits enough that I think you got to downgrade him relative to somebody like Andres Gimenez. Also, he bats lower in the lineup because the Phillies obviously have a lot of good hitters. So between the sitting and the batting low in the lineup, he had a combined 122 runs in RBI this past year, which is not very good.
That's fewer than Luis Garcia, who we were just talking about that being a big problem for him.
Yeah. And I was a little surprised that he got benched against lefties. Now, he wasn't good against lefties this year, but in his first 2 seasons, Bryson Stott actually was adequate against left-handed pitching. So I guess they just maybe didn't value, maybe like his defense wasn't good enough, or, he just wasn't solid enough against lefties and they thought like an Edmundo Sosa made them better, whatever it might be. It kind of feels like that's going to be the case moving forward for Bryson Stott as well. Let's take our final break. When we return, we'll wrap up the top 10 second basemen. We'll do that right after this. Welcome back in. The number 9 second baseman was Andres Gimenez, another one who did take a step back. His home runs dropped from 15 to 9. And I guess he didn't get the memo that progressive field was supposed to help with left-handed power because seemingly helped every other Guardians hitter except for Andres Gimenez. But he has provided exactly 30 steals in back-to-back seasons. And I would expect a little bit of a bounce back here. But Chris, again, it feels like a similar projection for Gimenez and Stott. Maybe Gimenez a little bit better for the reasons that Scott pointed out.
Yeah, I think Gimenez is a better bat for batting average. Better bet for batting average. And probably just playing time. Like he's an outrageously good defender. So he's not going to sit unless he needs time off. I think both Stott and Gimenez, they're kind of the same guy. And they kind of had the same situation where both clearly overperformed in 2023. Both underperformed a little bit in 2024. So like, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a little bit of improvement from both. Like if Gimenez hits 265 in 2025 with 12 home runs, that's an improvement. And I don't think that's out of the question. It's still, I think, a pretty unappetizing combination of skills and production from a fantasy player, but he's fine. He's probably okay in a roto league. I don't know. He's completely unexciting. I think there's no upside there.
Yeah. And then your number 10 second baseman, the best for last, Willie Castro. How did we get here? Well, remember, I'm not including players who are no longer eligible at second base. He ranks much lower than this if you just look at the list in a roto league on CBS, but I just didn't think it was helpful to talk about guys that don't have this eligibility anymore. Mm-hmm. So took out names like Betts and Steer and Cedon Rafaela, Luis Arraez. And again, that brings us to Willie Castro. A little foreshadowing. Scott does not even have Castro in his top 20 second baseman for next season. And he took a pretty big step back from 2023 as well. He hit 12 homers. He had 14 steals. The steals went from 33 to 14 in this environment, which just, if there's one thing that you were banking on, if I told you before the season Willie Castro was going to play as much as he did, you would say, wow, he's probably a lock for 30 plus steals. But it actually was quite the opposite. He only gave us 14, and he fell off pretty hard in the second half. Scott, Willie Castro, a fine utility player. It feels like he was thrust into more playing time than he should have because the Twins just had so many injuries this year.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I don't rank him in the top 20 for next year is he's very versatile, and so that's going to keep him a semi-regular player, but he played so much this year that I think he wound up being top 10 by default because he wasn't actually that good at anything. He just compiled. He compiled by being in the lineup while guys who missed time with injury, and there are a lot of guys who missed time with injury. You'll see it. You'll see some of their names when we talk about our top 10s for next year, top 12s for next year.
Yeah, top 12.
You'll see some of those names. But I expect Willie Castro to play less than he did, and I hope some of these better players play more than they did, which is why it was easy to keep pushing Willie Castro down. I mean, if you can't count on him to be an impactful base stealer, there just isn't a lot there of value for fantasy.
All right. Well, again, that was your top 10 second baseman from this past season. Ketel Marte, Jose Altuve, Brice Turang, Luis Garcia, Nico Hoerner, Marcus Semien, Maikel Garcia, Bryson Stott, Andres Gimenez, and Willie Castro. Just want to quickly hit some news and notes before we take a look at those top 12 for next season. And up first, Sonny Gray is on track to have a normal offseason after ending the regular season on the IL with right forearm flexor tendonitis. Kind of scary, something we need to watch in the offseason. Mason Wynn underwent surgery to have a cyst removed from his hand. David Fry will have his right elbow examined by Dr. Keith Meister next week. He dealt with right elbow inflammation in late June, which might explain why he slowed down so much. It basically coincides with first 3 months, David Fry was awesome. He hit 310 with 8 homers, 4 steals, and a 945 OPS. Final 3 months, he hit 211 with 6 homers and a 646 OPS. Or maybe he just turned back into David Fry. Both of those are possibilities.
He had a good postseason, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
I mean, he had that one big home run, I know, and that wasn't his only home run. So I didn't move Drew. I didn't move David Fry. I almost called him Drew. I didn't move David Fry way back up my rankings at catcher, but I got him back in the top 24 at least.
Yeah. In 10 games in the postseason, Fry hit 286 with 2 home runs, 8 RBI, and an 869 OPS. Just some updates on venues for next season. The Oakland A's, I guess Oakland no more, are going to be playing in Sacramento Sutter Health Park. And it does sound like there are renovations being made to that ballpark. And, as we learn more, I believe they're going from turf to grass or vice versa.
They're I believe they are installing grass. They were playing on field turf before this.
Yeah. So they're installing grass. They're supposed to be making the dugouts bigger to obviously accommodate major league teams and making changes to the batter's eye. Apparently they have a big video board in center field in the batter's eye, and the batter's eye is very skinny. And so it's been a tough place to hit. And I'll say it's because of the batter's eye there. So I don't know, if they improve the batter's eye and the ball flies like it's supposed to out there, maybe Oakland A's hitters are going to be awesome. I don't know exactly yet, but as we learn more, we will let you know.
Poor Joey Estes, though.
This is just all
so bad. It's so bad.
It doesn't have to happen.
Right.
It just it's so stupid. You look at the other thing we're going to talk about, and this was a force majeure, right? Is that the right term?
I have no idea.
That was an act of God forced a team out of a stadium.
Yeah.
This is just their lease doesn't end for a couple more years in Oakland. I'm pretty sure they could have just stayed in Oakland. It's all so stupid.
Yeah. That other situation you were talking about is the Tampa Bay Rays. Not exactly sure where they will play, but it sounds like Tropicana Field will not be an option, at least early on in the season, because the roof actually got ripped off during this most recent hurricane down in Florida. So I think I've already kind of heard some options bandied about. Maybe George Steinbrenner Field, where I believe the Yankees play their preseason, their spring training games, or Dunedin.
The problem is those teams all have minor league teams that play there.
Right.
That Dunedin, Lakeland, Steinbrenner Field, all the ones in the Tampa area have Class A affiliates who already have their schedule set. So
yeah,
I think there's a chance that they never play in Tropicana Field again, because the estimates that have been bandied about have been it's going to cost $100 million to replace the roof.
Wow.
And they're already I think they're planning to break ground on the new stadium in January of next year. So if that's going to be ready by 2028, is that 3 years from now?
3 years.
Sorry. Yeah. It just might not make sense. And you can't play in Tropicana without a roof because it doesn't have a drainage system. So I think there's a legitimate chance that they are playing. I think from what I've read, the most likely outcome is possibly Disney's Wide World of Sports. Is that what they still call it? Where the Braves used to do spring training, I think, in Orlando. But it's possible they don't play in Tampa at all the next couple of years.
Yes.
It's a bad situation.
We could legitimately have 2 major league teams playing in minor league ballparks, or even worse, if it's, the Wide World of Sports in Disney. It's
that seems like the likeliest outcome at this point.
And this one's just obviously bad luck. So like you said, it's unfortunate. Japanese starting pitcher Shinsuke Ogasawara. I'm going to have to look into that name because that's a bit of a tough one. He will be posted for MLB teams this offseason, and he's a 27-year-old lefty. This year in Japan, he pitched to a 3.12 ERA with a 1.20 whip, just 82 strikeouts over 144 and a third, 5.1 K per nine, 1.4 walks per nine. He has had better strikeout seasons in the past, and it sounds like it's a low 90s fastball. good changeup, a slow curveball. I don't think he's anywhere near like a Imanaga type pitcher. But, we'll learn more about his scouting report in the offseason. And he could be an innings eater for somebody.
Point out one thing. He had a 3.12 ERA this year. His team played in the Central League in Japan. The average ERA, he had a 3.12. The average ERA there was 2.88 this season.
Wow.
Japan is in the middle of like a 1968 style dead ball era.
Wow.
It's wild. Yeah. The average OPS in Japan last year, 645.
I just saw a report that Franmil Reyes is staying in Japan for another year. They need him. They need all the power.
The only guy who can hit for power.
Yeah. Lastly, rest in peace to legendary Dodgers pitcher Fernando Valenzuela, famously known for Fernando Mania in 1981. He started that season with 8 straight complete games, 5 of which were shutouts. And obviously this is way before my time, but just the magnitude that he had on baseball and obviously, Hispanic and Mexican culture. It's a big loss to the Dodgers and obviously the game of baseball. So rest in peace there to Fernando Valenzuela. Early 2025 second base rankings. We're going to compare and contrast Scott's top 12 here. And starting with the top 6 for Scott, we have Ketel Marte, Jose Altuve, Ozzie Albies, Marcus Semien, Jordan Westburg, and Luis Garcia. Guess what, Chris? Same exact top 6. We have not
love when we agree.
We have not talked about Ozzie Albies or Jordan Westburg yet, and so let's just quickly talk about those two.
Yeah,
injury.
I said earlier in the show there are 5 good second basemen, like ones I feel confident are good, and 2 of them we haven't mentioned yet, Albies and Westburg.
Yeah, and it was another injury-riddled season for Ozzie Albies, but just such bad luck. It's not his fault. Limited to 99 games with a fractured right big toe and then a fractured left wrist. And I mean, you'll hear this as a theme as we recap the positions. A lot of players miss time with either a fractured finger, fractured wrist, fractured hand, because again, it's like control in baseball is kind of all over the place right now. But when he was healthy, Ozzie Albies wasn't great either. Maybe he was playing through the injury. He hit 251 with 10 homers, 8 steals, 707 OPS. Scott, in general, Albies feels like a player that when he has these down years or injury-riddled seasons, buy the dip in the ADP the following season.
Yeah, it's broken bones. 2 of the last 3 years, broken bones got the better of him, and I don't think his bones are especially brittle. He just has these freak accidents this year. It was a broken toe and a broken wrist, and in 2022, it was a broken foot and a broken pinky.
He's got to drink more milk, Scott. He's got to drink more milk.
I guess. I don't know. But, he's been insanely reliable throughout his career, apart from the injury-shortened seasons. And we could look at the actual numbers from this season: 251 batting average, 707 OPS. Okay, that's not great. But the same was true in 2022. He didn't get the full season for his numbers to normalize. So I don't think it's really fair to hold that against Ozzie Albies. He's still in the prime of his career. He's going to be 28 next year. And I think there's a good chance he stays healthy and gives you 25 to 30 homers with 15 to 20 steals, which would be hugely valuable at this position, obviously.
And I do wonder if we will hear anything this offseason about him only batting right-handed, because we saw that down the stretch.
The experiment didn't go too well.
Yeah. I don't think we will. I wish it went better. I'd love to see it, but I would be very surprised if he abandoned switch hitting based on what we saw. And he was coming back. He was hurrying back from a badly fractured wrist. So the expectation was probably that he'd struggle. I don't think the reason he struggled was because he was batting right-handed against right-handed pitchers, but I don't think it did anything, his performance, to convince anyone, okay, this needs to be his permanent arrangement.
The number 5 ranked second baseman for both of you is Jordan Westburg, who also had himself a breakout season. And my early, very limited research, Westburg is somebody I feel like I want a lot of next year. He hit 264, 18 home runs, 6 steals, 792 OPS in 107 games. He also missed time with a fractured right hand. But I love everything except for the home ballpark. I mean, I wish this guy played in like Cincinnati. It would be amazing. But even with that, I think he could have an even bigger breakout next year. He hits the ball hard. The expected stats are awesome. 91st percentile sprint speed. Chris, I think we could see Westberg run even more next year, which is what we saw from Gunnar Henderson from year 1 to year 2 as well.
Yeah, that would be my hope, because I do have some concerns about how much power he's going to hit for at the major league level, mostly because of the home ballpark, like you mentioned. Like there are things to be concerned about with the plate discipline. He's a very heavy free swinger. He swings and misses an awful lot. In zone contact rate below average. Like there are concerns, but I think the power is good enough that I wouldn't be that concerned about it if he didn't play in Baltimore. I just worry it might be like a 25 homer ceiling when it should be a 30 homer ceiling. That being said, he's got a lot of oppo power. Baltimore actually, weirdly, not one of his worst parks in terms of expected home runs. Boston was worse, which has that deep right center, so that makes sense. Kansas City was worse. But yeah, I think if you're looking for Jordan Westberg to emerge as one of the next great second basemen, I think it probably needs to be 25 homers, 20 stolen bases. In a really good lineup, I think that's within the realm of possibility. I just don't know how comfortable we should be projecting that kind of stolen base potential. I think it's possible. I think he's certainly physically talented enough for it. Whether they'll let him do it is a different question.
100%. I could see him hitting, I think a fair projection is probably 23 to 25 home runs, 10 to 12 steals. And anything on top of that is just gravy. But based on his sprint speed, at least, I would not be surprised if he goes out and steals 20 bases.
You mentioned he didn't run much in the minors either, right?
Yeah.
I'm not counting on steals for Westberg, even though he runs fast.
Yep. 7 through 12 in the second base rankings for Scott. We have Nico Hoerner, Brice Turang, Xander Bogaerts, Brandon Lau, Gleyber Torres, and Jackson Holliday. And Chris is 7 through 12. Nico Hoerner with italicized, underlined, asterisk, everything next to and underneath his name. Number 8 is Brice Turang. Number 9 is Xander Bogaerts, followed by Brandon Lau, Luis Rengifo, and also Jackson Holliday. So some differences here. Scott has Gleyber Torres in his top 12. Chris doesn't. Chris has Luis Rengifo in his top 12, and Scott doesn't. So let's quickly run through some of these players. And Scott, I know Brandon Lau is someone you typically like, and when he's on the field, he's pretty good. He's a big power producer. He's going to miss time. Nearly identical seasons, 2023 and 2024. The problem is he played less than 110 games in both.
Yeah, and yeah, I mean that's annoying, but obviously the per game production for Brandon Lau is rare at this position. He might be the best pure power hitter at the position. I hope he gets traded. I think he's at a point where it would make sense for the Rays to trade him, and then at least, he might still get injured, but we wouldn't have to worry about him platooning so much since that's such a Rays thing. And I think it makes sense to put him in the top 10 here, just hoping that he plays a little more, because we're at a point at this position already here where we're just hoping for things. I mean, Chris and I both have Jackson Holliday 12th. It's an even more extreme case of just hoping for something, because we obviously didn't see a lot this year to suggest Jackson Holliday is major league ready.
Chris, talk to me about Luis Rengifo, who you have inside of your top 12 at second base. He ran wild in a small sample size, hit 300 with 24 steals in just 78 games. Is that speed real? I know the Angels were really aggressive. He's also just 37th percentile sprint speed, and he's coming back from wrist surgery, which also has its concerns.
Did he miss time early in the season with an injury? Like there was a point where he was not available, right? Because it's just that 34th percentile sprint speed, just that feels fake.
He had tightness in his hamstring in March, so before.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I remember. Yeah. He missed time, and he missed a lot of time in spring with a hamstring injury. So he's not a burner by any means, but he had been above average in sprint speed before last season. He stole 24 bases in 78 games like that.
That's what's weird about it for Rengifo, because his sprint speed was down, but he was much more aggressive as a base stealer.
And that makes me think that it's probably like an artifact of how they record the data where, I think it's based on like competitive runs, and maybe he only stretched himself out when he needed to. So he had like, that's the thought for me, at least. And that's the hope when looking for Luis Rengifo, because if he can be a 35 stolen base guy, I think there's some upside here. Like, I think the skill set's not that much different from Andres Gimenez and Bryson Stott and those guys, except that I think Luis Rengifo is probably going to bat in a more advantageous spot in the lineup, probably first or second. And if he can be a 265 guy with 35 stolen bases, I think he'll probably hit, 15 or so homers like he did the previous 2 seasons. If that comes with 35 steals, I think that's a really interesting player. He might score 95 runs. If he goes back to being a single digit steal guy, or even just like a 20 steal guy, that's probably just an also ran even at second base. So it's a lot going on the stolen bases, but with Ron Washington, how aggressive they were. I mean, didn't Nolan Shanwell steal like 8 bases or something? Like, there were some weird results for the Angels, and he had 10 stolen bases.
You'll remember before Mike Trout tore his meniscus.
Yeah, he was running a ton.
First time. Yeah, he was back to being a base stealer.
I think that's
Ron Washington was pushing.
Yeah, I think that's a real thing. Like, I'm not actually that worried about Luis Rengifo's speed. Obviously, I'm ranking him as a top 12 second baseman. But yeah, I think he can be like a super deluxe version of the Andres Gimenez and Bryson Stott types. Yeah.
If I could drop my one stat on Rengifo here, points per game, I mentioned only 2 players at second base had more than 3. You had Ketel Marte at 3.68, Jose Altuve at 3.05. Third at the position in points per game was actually Luis Rengifo at 2.92. I rank him 13th, so he's just outside the top 12 for me. But yeah, I mean, I see that. I'd rather take a shot on him doing something like that again than just settle for Andres Gimenez or Bryson Stott. But I'm kind of doubtful he can do all that again. Not maybe the stolen bases, maybe, but the 300 batting average, that's obviously his expected batting average was like 261, and that's closer to what he's hit normally. So I think it may be too good to be true for Luis Rengifo, but he's going to play a lot, and I'll gamble a little for upside at this position.
And to be clear, like, you've got Gleyber Torres at 11 instead of Rengifo.
Yeah,
I think that's fine. Like, I think betting on a Luis or a Gleyber Torres bounce back, which happened in the second half. He had a 780 OPS in the second half. Stopped running, which is a concern because that had helped boost his value the last couple of seasons. And obviously he's a free agent, so we don't know where he's going to be playing. But yeah, if you want to, I think it's fine to swap Gleyber for Luis Rengifo if you want to go for a little more safety. And Jackson Holliday is just kind of we'll throw him at 12 and wish. I think we both kind of feel that way, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I said. And with Gleyber Torres, when I published my article, I originally had him like 15th rather than 11th. And it was just one of those situations where it's like, I'm overthinking this. Gleyber Torres is still young, has a good track record, is getting out of the pressure cooker of New York in all likelihood. And there's a really good chance he's a top 10 second baseman again. So I'm going to stick him 11th.
If you asked me a month ago, I would have said 99% chance Gleyber Torres is not on the Yankees. He might be playing himself into something because he's having a good postseason. He played better in the second half. Maybe they just kind of jack it up on a 1 or 2 year deal. Keep him in New York.
That's probably fine if he goes back to the Yankees. If he's leading off there, I said getting out of the pressure cooker of New York is a good thing for him, but he's played his whole career there, and it's mostly been good.
Yeah, no, totally fine. With Jackson Holliday, just quickly mention, because I'm sure we'll talk about him all off season. There is nothing at the major league level that we can point to and say this is happening next year for sure. In 60 career games, he is batting 189 with 5 homers, 4 steals, a 565 OPS, and a 33% strikeout rate. But we know he has massive prospect pedigree. He comes from the family. Obviously, his dad was a great player. And we know that progress is not linear with top prospects. We've seen this time and time again. The first year that Mike Trout was called up, he was bad. And then he came back the next year and he, returned like first round value for fantasy. So I'm not saying that's going to happen for Holiday, but it's also not out of the question. So just keep that in mind. Don't write him off yet. Let's see what Jackson Holiday.
Apparently there's another Holiday coming who might be a number 1 overall pick.
I think he's in high school, right?
What's going on? I get his dad's like a coach, right? That's like,
yep.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yep.
I will just say, like, you don't want to overreact to 60 games. I do think like future projections for Jackson Holiday have to be lower than they were before, because the biggest thing was this was supposed to be like 65, maybe 70 grade hit tool. Like, it was supposed to be like as projectable as a hit tool can be for a player this young. And then in the majors and even in AAA, he had a lot of contact issues. In zone contact rate was below average at the major league level. I believe it was around average at AAA as well. That's when the whole thing is built on a foundation of plus hit tool, and now it looks like you're hoping plus, but maybe just average. That's tough. On the other hand, he's not 21 yet, right? He doesn't turn 21 until next season.
Yeah. Or maybe in December, something like that.
Yeah. So you don't want to, like, he is younger than I think all but like 2 players who were drafted in the top 10 in this year's MLB draft. So like, we're not writing Charlie Condon off. We shouldn't write Jackson Holiday off either.
Yep. All right. We're going to wrap there for Scott and Chris. I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. And we will be back again next week. Bye-bye.